Today's video is going to focus outside of hockey, but still deal with it as in pretty much all my videos. And I'm sure most of you guys who tune in here are, of course, big time hockey fans, but I would assume you follow other teams within your area. Take me, for example, I grew up relatively in New York, so I follow the Knicks, the Giants, the Yankees, along with the Rangers. And when we look at these four franchises, we see a lot of success. We take the Yankees and see their 27 World Series and their legendary players in Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle, Jeter, Yogi Berra, A-Rod, DiMaggio, Mariano Rivera, and the list keeps going and going. The Giants have a very similar thing. There are legendary players like Phil Simms and Lawrence Taylor, Eli Manning, and Michael Strahan, and so on. The Rangers, the same. Messier, Leach, Graves, Lundqvist, Richter, Gilbert, and Gretzky, and so on. But then we see the Knicks, and the Knicks, they have legendary players, but have had very limited playoff success. They've only made the playoffs once in 10 seasons and performed really poorly. That ties in today's video about the Philadelphia Flyers. They are the New York Knicks of Philadelphia. They've been stuck with a long period of, inferiority to be exact. In my opinion, they're the most neglected franchise in the city of brotherly love. They won two cups back-to-back in 1974 and 1975, and they made an appearance in the Stanley Cup Finals in 2010, but otherwise, they've been on the outside of the Philly sports fan spotlight. Last Sunday, the Phillies clinched a spot in the World Series for the first time since 2010, which weirdly enough was the same season as the Flyers' last Stanley Cup final appearance. We have the Philadelphia Eagles, who still remain undefeated at 6-0 and could actually go 17-0. Who really knows? Their schedule can speak for itself. Not to mention that they also won the Super Bowl in 2018, which is a recent time frame to be fair. The 76ers have had a great free agency. They had a great season last year. They already have their superstars in guys like Joel Embiid and James Harden, and they have an underrated pickup in PJ Tucker. So all these teams, they've kind of set the bar of what success looks like, but the Flyers have not been able to do the same. They went from the hottest team in the league before the pandemic to getting blown out, firing coaches, and trading their star players to begin a painstakingly slow rebuild. For the most part, they are the Philadelphia team who people are casting doubts on, and I think everyone can agree how important sports are to Philadelphians. Their passion for sports goes to levels that no other city can reach. I mean, their fans would do just about anything to win. Going back to the Flyers, they are trying desperately to catch the attention of people in Philadelphia, which is crucial and super beneficial if they can pull it off. Philadelphia has one of the most popular sports markets in North America, and if the Flyers can make the most out of it through marketing and whatnot, then it's a huge plus for them. Before the season began, most people were expecting Philadelphia to be a dumpster fire. They got rid of the one guy in Philly sports that pretty much everyone knew in Claude Giroux, who was the longest tenured Philadelphia athlete amongst the Big Four. They lost other long tenured guys in Sean Couturier, who's always injured and is on IR right now, and Jacob Voracek, who got traded to Columbus from Cam Atkinson. But they've made some really interesting changes that are getting their true fans hyped and maybe some less Flyers-based fans excited to watch some hockey. They started with hiring John Tortorella as their head coach, and when anyone talks about John Tortorella, they all know how his style of hockey is. He's going to work these players to the max in a very strict and no-nonsense manner. They also got Tony DeAngelo in a nice homecoming, as he's from South New Jersey, who all of us probably know by now can be a huge difference maker. He's an agitator, a great locker room guy, and can definitely change the culture, and most of all, he's a great defenseman. But is this all going to help the Flyers get back on their feet and popularize themselves amongst Philadelphians? And if I'm being fair, I think this all starts under John Tortorella. This is the guy who, again, is hard-nosed, no nonsense, it's my way or the highway type of coach. That's how Philly fans are too. When they win, they celebrate. When they lose, they riot. We've seen it so many times in the past. They do not take losses with a grain of salt, and I feel like John Tortorella perfectly encapsulates that. If we remember the days of Peter Laviolette in Philadelphia, he was also extremely hard-nosed and quite demanding as the head coach there, and that got the Flyers a chance of the Stanley Cup in 2010. The fans, they loved him so much, but his quick decline after 2010 got him fired in 2013. The Flyers have yet had a demanding coach like him until Tortorella, as the multiple Jack Adams Award winner, said in the press conference countless times that he is here to save the Flyers by creating a new standard of success. And the best part is that he really wants to not just create success, but create success in the city of Philadelphia. In his orientation press conference, he said that he told his own wife that Philadelphia was a specific place he would want to come and build success in. This is pretty big for the city, considering we never heard the same things being said when he was in Vancouver or Columbus or New York. The only issue I see about this is how he treats his players. We've seen countless examples within the last decade itself of Tortorella being hated by multiple players. We had the New York Rangers as example number one, where we had a guy like Henrik Lundqvist calling the 2012-13 season a step back. We had Brad Richards angry about getting scratched in a playoff game, a game where he should be the last person getting scratched. And then at the end of the 2012-13 season, when Tortorella got fired, Sean Avery expressed his relief and joy in retirement about Torts finally going, so it seems like he wasn't a fan of him either. Then with the Canucks, we had the whole cell phones thing going on in the press conference, and once Kevin Bieksa getting yelled at for taking a dump, so it was all sorts of weird things going on there. And then when he kind of got the job offer from Columbus, this is where we saw the most stuff go down. We saw Pierre-Luc Dubois being unhappy with Tortorella to a point where he stopped trying, and that got Torts infuriated, and so he traded Dubois to Winnipeg for Patrick Laine. And then funny enough, Laine got benched like 3 games into his Columbus tenure, and he wasn't happy about it either. So there's a lot of things going on right now with this guy and his NHL coaching career that we should take note of. And as of right now in Philadelphia, there's been no complaints, but it's good to just note his past with other teams and players. If the players don't like Torts, this could lead to some disconnect, and that could hurt the already low attendance numbers in Wells Fargo Center. The Flyers had the lowest average attendance numbers in the history of Wells Fargo Center, which obviously would exclude the 2020-21 season because, COVID and stuff in Pennsylvania. I don't think they even allowed fans back then. But still, even with the inflated number of tickets being bought, I'm sure there were fans who did not even want to attend the game on a second thought. It was still the lowest ever. Fans started doing the classic brown paper bag over their face to show their embarrassment and resent towards the team. There was even a time where a radio station dedicated to Philly sports, which at the point in time was airing in late February or early March, meaning that football season was over, so they can't be talking about the Eagles. Baseball season had begun, so there was really no Phillies news, and that left the Flyers in the 76ers, but they almost never talked about the Flyers unless something huge happened, which was mostly just harsh criticism of the team's downfall. There were even former Flyers players calling out the organization for their poor efforts to treat alumni right during the Hall of Fame induction ceremony last year. All of this could maybe be under control if Tortorella plays his cards right, but this will be a very tough journey. He has almost nobody to support him as of right now. Now let's just talk about how Philly has expanded for just a minute here, because it's pretty interesting to think about it. The metropolitan area of Philadelphia is one of 12 cities to have a major sports team in each of the Big Four North American leagues. They are of course a much smaller city compared to the likes of New York, Chicago, and LA, as this certainly makes them much more different from these bigger cities, as their fan bases will be a lot smaller. But the Flyers did not waste any time when they came into the league in 1967 after the expansion draft. They became the first team to win the Stanley Cup as an expansion team and drafted several oversized tough guys to make the team stronger. These players' penchant for fighting and amassing record amounts of penalty minutes got them the title of the Broad Street Bullies, whose style had a massive influence on Philadelphia sports. They became one of the most feared teams in sports in a city where fear and aggression is heavily emphasized. We still see guys part of the group in Bernie Perron and Bobby Clark who 50 years later are still an important part of the organization. That 70s era of Flyers hockey carried on into the 1980s, where they made 3 Stanley Cup appearances, but in the 1990s, the public eye of Philadelphia fell in love with the team. And that's because in 1992, generational superstar talent Eric Lindros was traded to the Flyers after refusing to play with the team that drafted him originally in the Nordiques. He would lead Philly to 16 playoff appearances from the 1994 season to the 2011 season, but since their 2010 Stanley Cup final run, the Flyers have died off from Philadelphia sports. I also learned that the organization is trying to do anything under the sun to get more popular, such as hosting events like Throwback Thursdays to reminisce those legends I was just talking about. That doesn't necessarily mean that the Flyers are going to get more aggressive, in which to just acquire a bunch of enforcers and play 70s style hockey again, but it means that they will need to try to really grow their fan base out, and that starts by mixing with their fellow Philly teams and other leagues. We have seen superstars from other Philadelphia teams come to different sporting events. We had Joel Embiid at the Eagles game, we had Jason Kelce at a Phillies game, and we had Tyrese Maxey at a Flyers game, just some examples of how players of different teams interact with each other. For my personal example, the Giants head coach Brian Daboll was at every Rangers home playoff game, which was kind of funny because they won whenever he was there. Now we see tons of Giants and Yankees players coming to Madison Square Garden to enjoy the games. The Flyers were kind enough to allow their fans to watch the Phillies game in their bars. That brought several fans who were wearing Phillies jerseys to come to the Flyers game on that day itself against the Sharks. Travis Konechny talked about how the Phillies energizing the crowd gave the entire team a boost. He said that it got the crowd going and how it was pretty cool to be a Philly sports fan, rooting for the Eagles, rooting for the Phillies. It's all very incentivizing. But going back to Tortorella, we had another former Flyers head coach discuss him and Mike Keenan, who said that Tortorella was a perfect fit for this type of role, who can create positive results for the team and bring in more Philly sports fans. Both these guys are almost clones of each other. They're very aggressive, love succeeding, and have a feisty personality. In the NHL, bottom lines are everything. It'll ultimately come down to wins and losses and whether or not fans decide to come to the Wells Fargo Center for Flyers home games and whether or not the team itself can reignite the incredible passion of sports fans in Philadelphia. If Tortorella shows the fiery personality that fans have been calling for but can't push the Flyers back into Stanley Cup contention, then his hire itself cannot fulfill the dreams of the fans. But if the team manages to get back on track, fans will flock to the arena. Let's just take an example of the Phillies here, because in September, Citizens Bank Park was less than half full for Phillies home games, but now that they're in the World Series, they have the best home field advantage amongst any team in the MLB. If the Flyers manage to go on a deep playoff run, people will soon find that same 2010s final energy and that same energy that they've had throughout the seasons of those historic and emotional playoff runs. The bottom line is very clear right now for fans. Since the departure of Claude Giroux, there is no top-end talent on the Flyers roster that can compete with the powerhouse teams of the Colorado Avalanche and the Tampa Bay Lightning and other teams. By taking drastic steps forward, though, maybe the Flyers can regain their status as an important part of Philadelphia sports. Thank you guys for tuning in and have a wonderful day.